To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. The words spoken by the young Hamlet as he contemplates what direction he should take after learning that his father had died at the hands of his uncle, and adding insult to injury, his mother had married the murderous uncle. Now, I admit that my Hamlet is a bit over melodramatic, but the point being, we all have at times in our lives when we must discern which of two choices we must make. When we are confronted with having to make a life choice, this means that there are at least two options in which to consider. And both options usually present appealing reasons on why to choose the one over choosing the other. Both options present themselves as a path to achieve that greater goal in our lives. Hamlet's dilemma resonates with what was going on between Jeremiah and Hananiah as they were advising the people of Judah about what action to take for their future. Now, leading up to this morning's showdown between the prophet Hananiah and the prophet Jeremiah, King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonian Empire had already invaded Judea and had set up his own puppet king. Now, during that initial time, Jeremiah had a word from God saying, servitude of Judea to Babylon was God's wish, and that if they did not resist God's wishes, they as a people would be allowed to stay in their own land and live peacefully. But if they did resist Nebuchadnezzar, they were resisting God's word, and their cities would be destroyed and they would be carried off into bondage. Now, moving forward 2 years from that initial invasion, we now read where Hananiah says that he has a word from God, which says, defend your homeland and resist Nebuchadnezzar. The life would return back to being the way that it was, even to the point that their former king would be returned and once again rule over Judea. Life will be good. The two prophets with two differing words from God. Which one do you choose? That is the question. I hope that you find the encounter between Hananiah and Jeremiah disturbing, because it is. How do we know if the choices that we make are the choices that are in line with God's plan? The people of Judea needed to trust one of the two opinions being presented to them in the name of God. Fight and live comfortably after we win, or let ourselves be subjugated for a number of years, but live in our own homes, keep our own businesses, keep our families safe. The price? Our freedom. Fight for freedom or live as slaves. Now, there is a deeper lesson here. The lesson is are we paying attention to what God is saying to us? Or are we only hearing what we want to hear? It isn't always so clear, and usually only in hindsight are we able to discern what the right choice was. Now, if we change the context from war and invasion as the topic to injustice, we can see the dilemma that Jeremiah sets up for us. Martin Luther King Jr. entitled one of his books, "Why We Can't Wait." The title referred to the advice of comfortable people who told King and the rest of the civil rights warriors that racial justice would happen in time. The advice reflected the complacent stance that King and others were trying to rush too fast. Jeremiah counsels waiting, settling in uncomfortable to Babylonian power, simply accepting and adjusting to the status quo can come at too high a price at times. Sometimes the Christian response means not accepting the status quo, not acquiescing to events as they stand. 50 years ago, today, was the first gay pride parade held in New York City, known as the Christopher Street Liberation March. This parade was the result of an uprising a year earlier by homosexuals standing up to the New York City Police Department's policies of harassment and brutality against the LGBT community and their businesses. We know this event as the Stonewall Riots. For 3 nights on Christopher Street, there where the Stonewall Bar was located, gays and straights together joined and battled the NYPD for the justice of their civil rights. In the 1960s, the civil rights movement gained momentum when one older black woman refused to give up her seat to a white man on a bus. With the leadership of the prophet Martin Luther King Jr., this movement by protesters, both black and white, for the most part, were peaceful marches. Most of the violence that was experienced came from the institutions that were designed to protect its citizens, that were designed to protect those peaceful protests. We are today once again faced with the call for justice to end racism in our country. Like Jeremiah and Hananiah, we are hearing several differing calls to bring about peace. One call is to disband and for blacks to bear the systemic inequities that exist in our country and in time. Racism will disappear. The other call is no justice, no peace, with the battle cry of Black Lives Matter. As a young man who did not fully understand the civil rights movement, because in my all-white community, I wasn't confronted with the injustices that comes with racism. What justice means was only a theory at that point in my life. In the 1980s, I saw firsthand the injustice that comes if you are not a part of the norm of society. With the onset of the pandemic of AIDS, coupled with the gay rights movement. As a person who has lived his entire adult life being called less than a second-class citizen, I understand the meaning of no justice, no peace, and why we need to quit dismissing the slogan, Black Lives Matter. They point out a terrible inequity that the comfortable in our country do not wish to address. Am I sounding a little political right now? Are you feeling a little uncomfortable because of my bringing up the current racial tensions that we as a country are experiencing? Remember, the prophets were all about righting injustice. Jesus was all about righting injustice. As a minister commissioned to follow the teachings of Jesus, I am compelled to address injustice as I see it and when I see it. In some contemporary situations, Hananiah's advice to resist is the more faithful response. Hananiah was not the unfaithful, the false prophet that so many ministers have attributed over the years. And in other situations, Jeremiah's counsel of acceptance comes as the word from God. Jeremiah and Hananiah set then these choices before us. It is our task at this point in history to determine which prophetic voice we need to follow. And the best way for us to hear the voice of God is to get down on our knees and spend a whole lot of hours in prayer, asking for God's ever-speaking voice. Amen.